mechanical, just a brass bowl struck by a patient boy with very little sense of urgency. The sound is thin but golden. Midday is approaching. You thank the scribe with a slight bow. He doesn't notice and step back into the light. The street's hotter now. Shadows are shrinking. A dog sleeps under a fig tree like he's been doing it for 5,000 years. And above, that patient sky continues to move, slowly but with purpose. You squint upward, trying to guess what time it is. You're almost hungry. Which, in Babylon, probably means you're right on schedule. You find yourself back on the street, weaving between clay-walled homes with latticed windows and shaded doorways. A breeze, dry and warm, stirs a curtain made of woven reeds. It's midday in Babylon, and although the city doesn't stop entirely, it definitely slouches a bit. The heat flattens conversations, softens footsteps, and makes everyone reconsider errands they thought were urgent earlier this morning. But there's one person who isn't slouching. He's standing very still. On a rooftop. Staring straight up at the sky like it owes him money. You squint, trying to make sense of it. He's wearing a loose white robe, with a wide belt and a tablet case slung over his shoulder. From this distance, you can just barely make out the careful movements of his hand holding a stick, angled just so, measuring something invisible. Meet the Yuparu, the professional sky watcher. A priest astronomer who reads the heavens not for poetry, but for scheduling. He's not predicting the future, not exactly. He's determining when it's appropriate to eat lunch without upsetting Jupiter. The idea that someone like this could decide the rhythms of your day might seem ridiculous. But in Babylon, this was completely normal. Entire bureaucracies waited on these celestial reports before issuing orders, organizing ceremonies, or planting fields. You quietly climb a side stair mud brick, crumbling slightly with age but surprisingly sturdy, and make your way toward the rooftop. He notices you but doesn't react. Just offers a slight nod and gestures to the sky with his measuring rod. "Look," he says softly. "Venus is hiding." You blink. Well, yes, the sun is quite bright. But what he means is more complex. Venus, known here as Dilbat, has shifted from morning star to evening star. She's disappeared from one part of the sky, only to reappear in another after a few weeks. It's a cycle, as reliable as rain, and absolutely crucial to Babylonian timekeeping. He leans toward you, conspiratorially. When Dilbat hides, we wait. When she returns, we cook. That's not metaphor. That's scheduling. The reappearance of Venus after her disappearance behind the sun was a marker of transition. Some priests even refused to eat certain foods or advised the public not to during her absence. A celestial lunch break, if you will. Historians still argue whether this Venus-centric timing was genuinely observed by the average Babylonian or whether it was more of a temple thing, reserved for rituals and special fasts. But there's evidence that even market schedules and royal audiences were planned around these celestial cycles. Venus wasn't the only player, though. Each planet had its own behavior, its own personality. Mars, or Nergal, was temperamental and usually associated with war, drought, or your neighbor's very poor crop yield. Mercury, Nabu, was the bureaucrat's favorite, always zipping about like an over-caffeinated accountant. Jupiter, Marduk, the big boss, meant order, stability, good lunches. Saturn, Ninarda, Saturn was complicated. Saturn probably listened to sad music and reorganized his bookshelf a lot. The Sky Watcher kneels and opens his case, pulling out a clay tablet already marked with rows of tiny, neat cuneiform wedges. He adds another line. The stylus moves slowly, carefully, as though each stroke were part of a secret code. You ask him how he knows when to look. He shrugs. We were taught to feel it. The sky tells you. You just have to remember which part is talking. Simple. And also, not. The Babylonian calendar was a lunisolar one, which means it tried to juggle the movements of both the sun and the moon. Which, as anyone who's tried to schedule a meeting across time zones can tell you, is a recipe for headaches. Days started at sunset, months began with the new moon, and intercalary months, bonus months thrown in to realign things were added when the calendar fell out of sync. The priest smirks. Last year had 13 months. Lucky for the date sellers. Less so for the goat counters. The truth is, this was a society that took the messiness of time and gave it structure not through mechanical precision, but through cosmic choreography. When Venus vanished, it meant something. When the moon turned red, it meant something else. And sometimes it meant, cancel that festival, or don't let the king leave his bedchamber today. You sit beside him, gazing up. A hawk wheels overhead. Somewhere below, someone yells about lentils again. This man, and others like him, spent their days with necks tilted skyward and thoughts rooted firmly in clay. Their observations weren't just passed around for curiosity, they were documented, archived, preserved in temples for generations. Thousands of these tablets survive today, stored in modern museums, each one a snapshot of a very specific moment in the sky. Sometimes they're precise. The moon became visible 2 fingers above the western horizon. Other times, they're more ominous. Jupiter was seen near the crooked staff. Rain will not come. And sometimes they just note that nothing happened, which, honestly, sounds like a good day. The priest stands, dusting off his robe. He bows politely. Midday, he says simply. And without fanfare, he gathers his things and descends the stairs. You remain behind, watching the blue sky turn slightly white at the edges, like a page slowly fading. There are no bells, no alarms. Just you, the sun, and a vague sense that someone, somewhere, is starting to prepare the lentils. And with that, you're hungry again. The stars have spoken. You follow your nose. Specifically, your nose follows a drifting ribbon of steam that smells suspiciously like onions, garlic, and something a bit toasted, maybe sesame, maybe yesterday's bread getting a second life. Either way, it's a compelling trail, and it leads you around a quiet bend in the road to what might be one of the most underrated marvels in Babylon, a scribal school with its own open-air lunch stall. The courtyard is shaded by an overhanging awning of woven reeds. On one end, a boy is bent over a clay tablet, tongue poking from the side of his mouth in the universal sign of concentration. His stylus taps out neat cuneiform strokes with the same energy you might use to angrily jab a calculator after a long day. Beside him, another student not much older leans back and gazes lazily at the cloudless sky, clearly waiting for the sun to hit just the right angle that says, "Okay, it's acceptable to stop pretending to work now. Because here at the Aduba the tablet house students learn more than writing. They learn the stars. Not in the romantic, dreamy way we might imagine, but in the very practical, what to do when Mars won't stop hovering near your field kind of way. You sit quietly on a warm stone bench. No one minds. You're just one more silent presence in a place filled with them scribes, teachers, gods whose statues peer down from alcoves, probably judging the spelling errors. At the heart of Babylonian education is cuneiform. That angular, wedge-shaped script looks confusing at first, like someone let a chicken dance through wet sand, but it's surprisingly logical once you realize it's built on a consistent pattern of impressions. Much like life here, which is guided by patterns: sunlight, shadow, star positions, and temple lunches. You lean over and glance at a half-finished tablet resting nearby. It's not a shopping list. It's a star chart. Tiny lines represent constellations, others mark the movement of Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter. And there near the corner an odd-looking symbol, a faint curl with 3 prongs. The teacher notices your gaze. That one, he says, not unkindly. It's called the field. It appears just before Dilbat rises again. He means Venus. When it's high in the east, the day grows short. Good time to boil lentils. Of course. Lentils. Historians still debate whether star knowledge like this was truly democratized or simply held by elite priest scholars. It's true that most Babylonians probably couldn't write cuneiform fluently, but the visual rhythm of the stars, their rising, fading, and reappearing, was a public event. Like the moon, like the seasons, like the slow changing angle of a shadow on a temple wall. People felt time here. Or, at the very least, smelled it coming from the cook pots. The lunch vendor stirs a large clay pot balanced over a small fire. Inside, something bubbles softly. A thick, gloppy stew, speckled with legumes and strands of leek. It smells faintly like time travel, in the best way. He notices your stare and grins. This, he says, is stew for Dilbat's return. Of course it is. As it turns out, food and the stars go hand in hand. Just as Venus marks when to plant, rest, or fast, so too does she usher in times of feasting. The priests might have their omens and incantations, but the cook has lentils and garlic. Both are taken very seriously. He ladles you a bowl, thick and warm. The flavor is earthy, a little sharp, maybe heavy on the cumin, but also comforting, like eating something your ancestors might vaguely approve of. Around you, other scribes and students quietly eat, chatting in low voices about glyphs, eclipses, and which god might be in a mood today. One boy suggests that Mars has been acting grumpy lately. His friend counters that Saturn is clearly the one making people forget their offerings. The teacher sighs audibly. Outside the courtyard, the city hums faintly. No chaos. No rush. Just a quiet awareness that the sun has passed its highest point, and the day is beginning its gentle descent. You glance at the shadow cast by a nearby column. It's longer than it was earlier. Time is moving. Slowly, gently, steadily. It's worth noting that Babylonian star maps weren't just about telling time, they were also among the earliest forms of scientific astronomy. These weren't vague ideas scrawled on parchment, they were mathematically grounded, observationally recorded, and passed down through meticulous repetition. One fringe theory even suggests that early Babylonian astronomers used a rudimentary form of calculus to predict the movement of Jupiter. Historians still argue about that, of course. Some call it overinterpretation. Others call it genius hidden in clay. But here, now, that debate feels very far away. You finish your lentils. The bowl is warm in your hands. Someone laughs softly, as if trying not to disturb the dust. A lizard skitters across the floor and disappears into a crack in the wall. The teacher wipes his hands, walks to a sundial-like notch in the courtyard's edge, and glances upward. "Not yet," he says. "Still 2 fingers until Saturn dips. You have no idea what that means. But your belly is full, your limbs are loose, and the sun, it seems, has given you permission to sit a while longer. And here, in a courtyard where clay and stars guide the day, that's all you really need. You stay seated on that sun-warmed bench longer than you meant to. It's not laziness, okay, it's a little laziness, but it's mostly that Babylon has a way of lulling you. Between the heat, the quiet rhythm of footsteps on stone, and the distant, almost hypnotic chant of a temple chorus somewhere over the rooftops, you lose track of, well, time. Which is funny, given the whole reason you're here. Eventually, you peel yourself away from the comfort of the courtyard and head back into the streets, past thick-walled homes painted white with crushed gypsum, their small windows covered with reed mats. You nod to a vendor balancing a tray of sour milk on his head. He nods back, because that's what people do here, acknowledge your existence without asking too many questions. Now seems like the perfect time to explore the strangest thing about Babylonian timekeeping, how they connected daily routines like bathing, working, eating, and yes, even napping to the positions of actual planets. You pass a boy trailing behind his mother, chanting softly, "If Jupiter is bright, the king will be kind." She hushes him, not because it's wrong, but probably because no one wants to tempt fate like that on a Thursday. The link between planetary positions and practical routines might seem silly today. But to the Babylonians, this wasn't mysticism, it was scheduling. You didn't just eat lunch at noon, you ate when Venus hovered low or when a certain star reached a certain brightness. And sure, if you lived too far from the temple, you might rely on your shadow or the sound of someone else's cooking pot whistling through the alley. But for the most part, people synced their routines with what the sky was doing. Case in point, the temple of Nabu, the god of scribes and wisdom. You're standing in front of it now, a modest structure compared to the grandeur of Marduk's ziggurat, but no less important. Inside, time isn't tracked by ticking. It's calculated. Inside the temple courtyard, you find a priest gently rinsing his hands in a basin. A scribe waits nearby, holding a wooden tablet frame strung with taut cords, an early instrument for angular measurement. Together, they watch a section of sky like it's a performance that's been running for centuries with no intermission. You ask what they're waiting for. "Venus," the scribe murmurs, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "If she clears the haze soon, we light the afternoon fire." This is how daily routines happened, not based on what your stomach told you, but what the stars did. The afternoon fire wasn't just for warmth, it was also the cue to start preparing food, refreshing offerings, and if you were lucky, beginning to wrap up the day's work. One priest nearby, clearly in a talkative mood, explains that Babylonian planetary tracking went beyond omens. It shaped everything from crop rotations to courtroom appointments. When Saturn lingers in the archer's mouth, he says in a tone that suggests this is very obvious, you don't open land disputes. Right. Because Saturn is definitely the kind of guy who holds grudges. And it wasn't just big picture stuff. The average Babylonian would have a rough idea passed down, observed, or whispered from neighbors of which planet meant what. Venus meant love or rain. Mercury, speed and messages. Mars, misfortune or a very late goat delivery. Each had its season, its time of visibility, and its subtle sway on when to do what. Historians still argue whether people truly planned daily tasks according to celestial shifts, or if these ideas were more symbolic than applied. But multiple sources suggest that ritual fires, offering tables, and even dinner prep followed celestial cues. So, yes, if Jupiter was in a good position, you might throw an extra onion in the pot. You wander past the temple's outer wall and spot a curious stone platform, a carved square with angular grooves along its edges, and a faint curve on the top. It's not a throne. It's a star altar, a kind of open-air platform for viewing celestial transitions. From here, you can just glimpse the sky through an intentional slit between buildings. One old priest climbs up, rests both hands behind his back, and sighs like someone who's been doing this job for 40 years and has made peace with the fact that Mercury never arrives on time. Below him, a pair of assistants light a low fire and place a shallow dish of what looks like dried dates and crushed coriander. It's not a sacrifice. It's a signal. The rising of Venus, once it happens, will cue evening rituals, meal offerings, and the quiet tapering of the day. It's also a handy marker for when, frankly, everyone gets to start thinking about dinner. A boy peeks out from a nearby doorway. "Did Dilbat rise?" he asks. The priest doesn't answer immediately. Just hums thoughtfully. "Almost." And with that, everyone waits. You join them not because you know what you're doing, but because it just feels right. The sun has lowered just enough to cast a warm glow across the pale walls. The air smells of charcoal and roasted garlic. And somewhere behind the temple, someone has started playing a slow, sighing tune on a reed pipe. The priest nods once. "There," he says. "She's back." No trumpet. No cheer. Just a subtle acknowledgement. A moment shared. People start to move again. Quietly, smoothly. Someone stokes the communal oven. A scribe folds his tablet and heads toward home. Two boys begin stacking firewood beside a wall. Nothing dramatic. Just, time unfolding, as dictated by the stars. You exhale, long and slow. There's something remarkably calming about living in a world where the entire day pivots not on alarms or meetings, but on the reappearance of a single pale dot in the sky. And it turns out, yes, this is when lunch starts. You follow the scent of firewood and roasted barley through a sleepy alleyway. The light is softer now, the sun less assertive, casting long golden shadows that stretch like lazy cats across the street. Your feet shuffle through the dust with barely a whisper. The whole city feels like it's exhaling. Ahead, you spot a man carrying a bundle of reeds under one arm and a shovel over his shoulder. His tunic is dust-streaked, his sandals worn, and his expression bears the look of someone who has negotiated with both floodwaters and donkeys before lunch. He's a laborer, clearly, and possibly the most grounded timekeeper in the entire city. You fall into step behind him, the rhythm of his gait slow and deliberate. He turns down a side path that leads to a cluster of small homes, modest, domed structures with low ceilings, built from the same sun-baked bricks as everything else in this city. Their design keeps things cool, or at least less hot, in the sweltering afternoons. You watch as he drops the reeds beside a doorway, wipes his brow with a cloth that's already given up, and then heads straight for a wide ceramic bowl filled with water. He dips both hands in, splashes his face, then leans over the doorway and mutters something to someone inside. A second later, a young girl appears, carrying a shallow wooden plate stacked with flat bread and olives. Lunch is here. Again, not noon as you'd know it, but after Venus, as they'd say here. The logic of the stars has played its part. Now it's time to sit, chew, and, if possible, not move again for several hours. The man gestures for you to sit. You do. No one questions your presence, perhaps because you look sufficiently dusty, or maybe because Babylon has an unspoken rule that anyone who arrives quietly and sits without interrupting is clearly meant to be there. He tears the bread with rough fingers, dips it into a bowl of sour yogurt, and chews thoughtfully. Then he speaks not to you, but into the air, as if explaining his schedule to the gods or possibly the cat snoozing nearby. First light, he begins, I patched the canal. Half the water was going to that lazy farmer 3 houses down. After that, I stacked barley, helped my cousin chase a runaway ox, and then, he shrugs, Mars showed up. You raise an eyebrow. He chuckles. No, not really. But the temple boy said Mars was in the lion's jaw again, so I told my cousin the ox could wait. And that, right there, is how labor worked in Babylon. Yes, you had tasks. Yes, there were expectations. But if the sky had something to say about it, especially something ominous, then plans could be postponed. Work was a negotiation between people and planets. Historians still debate how strictly laborers followed celestial signals. Some suggest the astrological advice was mostly for the elite scribes, priests, and bureaucrats with enough flexibility to cancel appointments. But others argue that everyone, from fishmongers to potters, adjusted their rhythm subtly around the sky. Not because they had to, necessarily, but because it just made sense. The laborer continues eating. Between bites, he mentions how the position of the sun helps him decide when to rest his back. When my shadow is shorter than my foot, he says, I stop digging. That's not a metaphor, it's his version of a sundial. No need for gadgets when you've got built-in limbs and good instincts. He picks up a small clay jar, pops the lid, and offers you a taste. It's sweet, sticky, and full of tiny seeds. Probably date molasses, maybe honey. Definitely nap-inducing. You lean back on the warm stone. Around you, others are doing the same. A woman pours water into a cracked jug. 2 children chase a lizard up a wall with exactly the level of success you'd expect. A dog snoozes with one ear twitching against non-existent flies. This is what a Babylonian afternoon looks like. Not hurried. Not tightly scheduled. Just flowing like the canals that snake quietly through the fields outside the city. Work begins early, breaks when the sun is highest, and sometimes never really resumes until the evening calls for it. You close your eyes, just briefly, and imagine the bigger picture. Babylon wasn't all ziggurats and chanting. It was a place of fields, mud, sweat, and stars. And while the temple might have marked time with the rise of Venus, the laborers measured it with their skin, their shadows, and the sounds of bread sizzling on hot clay. One older man nearby jokes that his knee hurts when Mercury enters the Archer, and that's how he knows it's going to rain. His friends laugh. But then they glance up at the sky, just to double-check. Just in case. Because here, the heavens aren't some distant mystery. They're part of your day. Your body. Your bread. And when the sky says it's time to pause, you do. So now, as the sun dips ever so slightly toward the west, and the city sinks into a lull heavy with grain and slow conversation, you do the only reasonable thing. You lean your head against the wall, close your eyes, and let the sky keep the time for you. After all, Mars is still being difficult. No point trying to fight that. The shade of the wall is welcome, but the late afternoon sun refuses to be ignored forever. A breeze finally drifts through the narrow alley and tickles your cheek. You stretch, slowly, and open your eyes to a quieter street. Most people have retreated indoors. Only the most committed gossipers remain outside, murmuring over shared water jugs. You decide it's time to investigate one of Babylon's more frustrating obsessions, telling time with shadows. Specifically, their love-hate relationship with sundials. Now, before you imagine anything sleek or polished, let's clarify, Babylonian sundials were creative. Sometimes they were just sticks in the dirt. Sometimes angled bricks. Sometimes elaborate, inscribed stone slabs. But they all had one thing in common: they were rarely accurate. And yet somehow, everyone pretended they worked fine. Your feet lead you to the edge of a small public square. There, half hidden behind a clay planter full of wilting herbs, stands one of these devices, a simple stone with a raised edge and a stubby triangular wedge in the middle. The wedge casts a shadow, which, depending on the time of day and season, theoretically points to a line carved with symbols. The symbols, in turn, tell you things like time to feed the goat or the temple's starting incense again. Today, though, the shadow falls between two lines. Or possibly three. Hard to tell. A nearby boy is trying to read it. He squints, then shrugs, then hurries off either late or early, no way to know. You bend closer. The sundial is labeled with odd inscriptions, one set for summer, another for winter, and a third that seems to say, just guess. You appreciate the honesty. According to scholars, Babylonian sundials likely came later in their history, adapted from Egyptian or even Proto-Greek innovations. Earlier time-telling mostly relied on direct observation of the stars or shadow length estimation, which sounds poetic until you realize it means standing in place and watching your feet for a very long time. Still, they tried. One clay tablet describes using a vertical pole, about as tall as a man, to judge the hour based on how far its shadow stretches. Simple, effective, as long as you didn't sneeze and knock it over. Another mentions placing markers along walls to track the changing sun angles throughout the seasons, a kind of sun calendar, etched into architecture. Historians still argue whether these sundials were ceremonial, practical, or just nice lawn decorations. Some believe they were more of a backup system, a way to confirm what the stars had already told the priests. Others suggest they were for teaching purposes, helping apprentices develop an intuitive sense of time. Whatever the case, accuracy was not the priority. In a world where Jupiter might delay your court hearing and Mercury could ruin your sheep shearing, a sundial that's off by an hour isn't exactly catastrophic. You make your way to a small shrine nearby, one that's clearly seen better centuries. On its outer wall, you notice faint markings, a curve, some dots, and what might be a crude figure holding a rod. Possibly a depiction of a man measuring his shadow. Or just a man angrily poking at his stick because it won't cooperate. Hard to say. Inside the shrine, it's cool and quiet. A single oil lamp flickers, and the air smells of dry leaves and burnt salt. An old woman sweeps the floor with a bundle of reeds tied into a fan shape. She doesn't look up as you enter, just mutters softly to herself, something about sunlight stealing the flavor from olives. You nod respectfully, as if you fully understand her solar-produce concerns. A small shelf at the back displays clay tablets. You spot one with diagrams, circles, wedges, what might be angle measurements. This, presumably, is a tablet of sundial theory. The math is beyond you, but the scribbles show care. Someone really wanted this to work. You imagine a scribe from centuries ago, standing under the unforgiving sun, chalking equations onto a wall while squinting at a rock. Adjusting angles. Scratching his head. Adjusting again. Wondering why nothing ever lines up exactly the way it should. Because the truth is, Babylon wasn't all-knowing. It was ambitious. It wanted to understand time, not just track it. And that desire led to clumsy inventions and near misses. The sundial, while flawed, was part of that journey. You exit the shrine and return to the square. The sundial's shadow has shifted again barely. Someone has placed a fresh fig beside it, as if to say, "Nice try." The late afternoon air feels heavier now. A boy runs past with a handful of reeds, possibly on his way to a kitchen fire. A dog lifts its head, watches you, then decides you're not worth the effort. Fair. Back in the center of the square, someone strikes a hand drum slowly once, twice, then stops. It's not music. It's a message. Possibly marking the third hour after Venus, or maybe just announcing that the stew's done. You turn one last time toward the sundial. The shadow wavers as clouds drift past. Even the sun can't commit today. And yet, somehow, everything still happens in its time. You're drawn forward by scent this time. Something earthy, rich, and warm drifting lazily on the breeze like a whispered invitation. It smells like lentils, maybe onions, and something sharper, coriander? Or possibly crushed fenugreek seeds. Either way, your stomach suddenly remembers it hasn't eaten in about 3,000 years. You follow your nose around the bend of a quiet residential lane, flanked by the usual mud brick homes, their walls glowing soft ochre in the dipping sunlight. Most doorways are curtained with woven reeds or hanging fabrics dyed in gentle blues and browns, nothing flashy. Babylon likes its comforts humble, especially at this hour. There it is again, that smell. It's coming from a modest, domed structure ringed with clay jars and stacked wood bundles. Not quite a house, not quite a shop. More like a temple-adjacent kitchen. And standing just outside it, sleeves rolled up and head tilted toward the sky like he's expecting a divine taste test, is a man in a soot-smudged tunic. A temple cook. He doesn't notice you at first. His eyes are fixed on the narrow strip of sky between the rooftops, where the sun now hangs low, teetering between stubborn radiance and graceful retreat. A moment later, he turns abruptly, ducks inside, and returns with a long wooden ladle dripping something thick and beige. He sniffs, nods, and then mutters, "Still a bit early. Give it another star." You blink. A star? But of course. Because here in Babylon, stew isn't just cooked, it's timed. And the timer? The heavens. Specifically, temple kitchens like this one often aligned cooking routines with sky observations, particularly the heliacal risings and settings of major planets. While you might check a microwave or a digital thermometer, the Babylonian chef checks Venus. Or Saturn, if the soup's particularly temperamental. Today, it's the moment just before solar noon as defined by the temple astrologers, not the literal midpoint of the sun's arc, but rather its spiritually significant one. And that's when the lentils reach their peak texture, apparently. You ask the cook how he knows. He smirks and says, "When Venus blinks twice behind that rooftop, you stir. When it blinks thrice, you serve." You can't tell if he's joking. Probably. But also, maybe not. Inside, the kitchen is dim, but the heat is formidable. Clay ovens line one wall, their mouths yawning open with glowing coals inside. Overhead, bundles of herbs hang like sleepy bats: sage, mint, dried leeks. Everything smells roasted, toasted, or vaguely smoky. The air is thick enough to chew. On a low platform, a wide copper pot bubbles contentedly. You peek inside: lentils, yes, but also slivers of onion, green herbs, and little lumps that might be crushed date pulp. Sweet and savory, all in one pot. A culinary constellation. Another cook shuffles past, balancing a tray of flatbread rounds. They're hot from the oven, speckled with sesame, and slightly puffed. He offers you one with the blank expression of someone who's been baking since before the sun showed up. You chew. It's excellent. Lightly charred, salty, and soft in the center. The perfect companion to stargazed lentils. Historians still argue whether Babylonian temple kitchens followed set recipes or improvised based on available produce and celestial mood swings. Some scholars suggest they had sacred menus that varied by planetary alignment. Others believe the temple cooks just liked to show off. Either way, food here wasn't merely nourishment, it was ritual. A way to reflect the cosmic order in one's cooking pot. Which sounds pretentious, until you taste it. The head cook ladles stew into small bowls, each etched with cuneiform markings, possibly ownership tags, possibly passive-aggressive messages like "Don't touch my soup." He sets them on a stone ledge by the window. Outside, temple scribes and junior priests begin gathering with the excitement of people who've been reading about sheep entrails all morning and really need a break. Someone offers a jug of watered date wine. You take a cautious sip. It's syrupy and oddly refreshing, like prune juice that's decided to party. The meal begins with no ceremony. Just spoons, chewing, and the occasional hum. You join in, savoring the heat, the soft lentils, the faint bite of anise or something suspiciously like mustard seed. A priest across from you murmurs about the moon's angle today. His neighbor nods solemnly, then asks for more bread. And just like that, you realize something. For all their skyward obsession, the Babylonians were deeply present. Lunch wasn't rushed. Stew wasn't scarfed. The stars were watched, sure, but only so life on Earth could be lived better. Or at least more deliciously. As the bowls empty and the sun leans even lower, the kitchen staff begins clearing away utensils. The head cook checks the sky one last time, frowns, and mutters, "Mars is early again." Figures. You smile. Mars has apparently been ruining lunch schedules for centuries. You step out into the sunlight, your belly warm and heavy. The streets glow softer now, and a faint breeze stirs the reeds hanging from doorways. The city is slipping into its golden hour. From rooftops and temple towers, watchers continue their vigil, tracking the sun's descent, noting the flicker of the first brave stars, adjusting their charts and scratching thoughts into damp clay. You don't need a chart to tell you what time it is. You've eaten. You've listened. You've watched the stew bubble under the patient eye of Venus. And you've learned, in Babylon, the difference between lunch and legend is about one blink of a star. You walk slowly now, not out of fatigue, but in reverence for the moment. The city is shifting again. Afternoon, that loud, sticky, chatty part of the day, has slipped behind the western wall. In its place, twilight unspools like a soft shawl, dusting everything in diluted gold. Your path rises slightly as you make your way toward the palace district. It's not marked by grandeur, not in the way modern cities show off wealth with steel and glass, but by subtle signs, thicker brick walls, cleaner streets, and the sudden absence of wandering goats. Even the air smells less like sweat and more like aged cedar and incense smoke. You pass under a narrow arch flanked by guards in layered linen, their eyes scanning the horizon, but only halfway. Their shoulders droop a little like yours. Even Babylon's enforcers slow down when the stars are due. At the center of the royal complex, the ziggurat looms, a tiered cake of baked clay and age-old ambition. You don't go there yet. Instead, you veer toward the palace gardens, a place of relative quiet, where trees from distant lands grow in orderly lines and birds from the marshlands sing like they've never heard a city scream. In the middle of it all sits the king. Not a throne-bound spectacle, but a tired man in a linen robe, reclining on a carved bench beneath a fig tree. He's older than you expected, gray-bearded, deep-eyed, and absolutely still. His hand rests on a tablet, but he isn't writing. He's watching the sky. It's a good sky for watching. Pale lavender, streaked with the last remnants of day. A single planet, probably Jupiter, twinkles boldly overhead. The king exhales slowly, like even his lungs are on a schedule. You inch closer, unnoticed but not unwelcome. He shifts slightly, his voice soft. "They'll call soon. The chart's changing." He's referring, of course, to the nightly star readings performed by his cadre of court astronomers. These aren't casual glances upward. They are full-fledged celestial reports, comprehensive, poetic, and, quite often, used to determine if the king will have dinner, or go straight to bed. You remember the cooks grumbling about Mars showing up early? Well, here in the palace, Mars arriving at the wrong time might mean postponing an entire treaty negotiation. Or deciding not to irrigate barley fields tomorrow. Or rescheduling a royal haircut. Timing is everything when the universe might be judging your split ends. A young servant appears, bows, and whispers something. The king sighs. That's the second horn. They're ready. You follow behind as he rises. He moves slowly but deliberately, like a man used to pacing himself through decades of celestial micromanagement. The observatory chamber is a wide, open space high up in the ziggurat's inner structure. Openings in the wall frame the sky like art. Around the room, scribes murmur over fresh clay tablets. One holds up a wax board edged with lines and dots. Saturn entered the lion, he says. We recommend postponing the eastern caravan by 2 days. Another nods gravely. Also, the moon's angle suggests a minor grain surplus. The king listens without expression. His silence is not detachment, it's calculation. You get the sense that every night, this room feeds him more than just information. It offers him rhythm, reassurance, and sometimes a reason to do absolutely nothing. Historians still argue whether these readings truly shaped royal policy, or merely served as fancy justifications for decisions already made. Some scholars suggest the king knew how to manipulate his own omens. Others believe he was genuinely beholden to them, a willing puppet of the cosmos. The king turns to you surprisingly and gestures toward one of the sky charts. You see that line? He asks, pointing. That one tells me when to rest. You nod, even if you don't quite understand. He smiles, faintly. Most people think power means control. But the stars, they remind me to let go. To trust the pattern. A long silence settles. Outside, the stars have multiplied. The city below exhales fires lit, gates closing, nightbirds testing their voices. A group of singers drifts through the street below, humming a lullaby for no one in particular. And somewhere deeper in the palace, a bell rings once. The sound is soft, barely more than a suggestion. But it means one thing. Time for the royal nap. Yes, the king naps. Religiously. And not just because he's tired, but because the stars told him to. Babylonian astronomers believed certain alignments made sleep more restorative or, in some cases, more prophetic. If you dozed off at the right celestial moment, you might wake up with divine insight. Or at least a solution to that grain surplus. A servant approaches with a lavender-scented cloth. The king disappears into a side chamber. You don't follow. Some rituals deserve their privacy. Instead, you find a bench just outside the observatory. You sit, close your eyes, and imagine the palace quieting, the ziggurat humming, the stars sinking like gentle gears in a timeless clock. The city obeys them. The king obeys them. And for now, so do you. You're back on your feet before you realize it, drawn once again by soft footsteps and the promise of something curious this time, a procession of men and boys shuffling toward the edge of the ziggurat platform, arms laden with polished rods, ropes, and, is that a stick? Yes. A very deliberate stick. They speak in low tones, careful not to trip over one another in the semi-darkness. You join the tail end of the group as they settle into formation around a flat, waist-high platform set into the stone. It's marked with an intricate grid, part of it scorched from centuries of sun. This is no casual gathering, it's tonight's eclipse forecast. Now, to the modern mind, predicting an eclipse without telescopes sounds about as likely as guessing someone's birthday from the way their cat sneezes. But here in Babylon, they had a method. And it began, as many things do, with a stick. One young apprentice places it carefully into a notch on the grid. Another pulls a taut rope across the edge of the platform, sighting it with one eye and muttering something about the moon's last disappearance. A third consults a clay tablet with the air of someone decoding an ancient snack recipe. You settle in, just behind the oldest stargazer, his beard a cloud, his eyes squinting at the heavens like they owe him rent. He lifts a slender stylus and taps a point in the sky. There, he says, 3 nights hence, the moon shall bleed. You blink. Dramatic much? He seems to notice and softens the moment with a chuckle. Just a shadow. But a big one. Eclipses, after all, weren't just neat tricks of the cosmos. In Babylon, they were taken very seriously, omens of political shifts, droughts, or divine scoldings. If the moon disappeared, even briefly, the assumption was that some celestial paperwork had gone terribly wrong. And yet, here they were predicting the moment not with panic, but precision. The stick, you learn, helps track lunar cycles against the fixed points of certain stars. By noting where the moon should be and when, along with its distance from known constellations, Babylonian astronomers could approximate not just when an eclipse would happen, but where it might be visible. All done centuries before anything resembling modern optics. Historians still argue over how accurate these predictions were. Some believe the Babylonians nailed the general timing with remarkable regularity, especially by the 5th century BCE. Others think they leaned heavily on cycles like the Saros cycle more than actual nightly observation. The truth likely falls somewhere in between, a blend of cosmic memory, clay math, and a little old-fashioned intuition. Tonight's prediction involves the moon skimming the shoulder of a particular god-shaped constellation, probably one that's since been renamed by modern astronomy to something far less dramatic, like Triangle Minor. Still, the method is breathtakingly elegant. The elder leans over to a tablet that's drying near the edge of the platform. It's edged with tiny cuneiform lines, each one recording lunar risings, settings, oddities, and deviations. You squint and see an entry, moon absent at 5th watch, Venus uneasy. Venus uneasy, you ask. He grins. That's priest speak for something weird happened, but we're not sure what. It's comforting to know even Babylon's finest occasionally logged their mysteries like confused sleepwalkers. Behind you, the younger apprentices are now practicing shadow alignment, using bronze discs held above candlelight to mimic what they expect the eclipse to look like. It's part ritual, part educational game, and also a neat way to impress visiting nobles. If you'd had a Babylonian science fair, this would be the prize table. A tray of dried figs and cooled beer arrives, standard astronomer snacks, it seems. You nibble while watching the elder scratch a final line into the clay. The moon shall darken, he murmurs. And then the king shall rest easy again. Not everyone in Babylon feared eclipses. Some saw them as clean breaks, cosmic reset buttons that cleared the spiritual air. But no one ignored them. In a city where every onion sprout and barley sprig was aligned with the heavens, the sky going dark was never shrugged off. As the group begins to disperse, you linger a moment longer on the platform. The stick now lies flat, the rope curled loosely beside it. The stars above are bright now, fully visible, dazzling in their clarity. And you realize, Babylon didn't just gaze upward in awe. It listened. It calculated. It recorded. It practiced. It failed, occasionally. And then it tried again with one stick, one chart, one stubborn elder who'd memorized the sky long before you memorized your first Wi-Fi password. You descend the ziggurat steps slowly, each one still warm from the day's sun. In the distance, someone's playing a flute, maybe in celebration of the coming eclipse, maybe just because the stars look nice tonight. You look up again. And just for a moment, you wonder if the moon already knows what's coming. You wake with a fig seed stuck to your cheek and a vague memory of someone muttering about Venus. The ziggurat is quieter now, though not asleep. Babylon never fully sleeps. You're back on the lower terraces, trailing behind a short, round man in a linen robe dotted with ink stains. His name, though never officially offered, seems to be "Oh no, not again," judging by how often people mutter it when he approaches. He is, you quickly gather, an astrologer. But not the sky-chanting, celestial praying kind. He is a practical astrologer, equal parts mathematician, spiritual consultant, and part-time scapegoat. He's just left a merchant's house and is now muttering about birth charts, moldy figs, and something called a goat star alignment. He sees you, squints, and beckons. You want to see something ridiculous. Of course you do. He leads you into a shady alcove behind a perfumery, where a set of clay tablets sits drying in neat rows. Horoscopes, he says. Dozens of them. For every rich fool in the quarter. You'd think they were all planning a war. You crouch beside him, inspecting the soft wedges of cuneiform. Each tablet has a person's name, a list of planets, a few cryptic symbols, and some rather specific life advice. Avoid poultry for the next 2 lunations, he reads aloud, chuckling. The man's a butcher. It turns out, Babylonian astrology wasn't just for kings and priests. It was personal. Very personal. Merchants, midwives, even potters commissioned sky readings to guide everything from business deals to romantic prospects. And, yes, poultry choices. The logic worked like this: the gods communicated through stars. The stars influenced the planets. The planets, in turn, shaped your fate down to the quality of your wheat porridge. By mapping planetary positions at the time of your birth or, in some cases, your worst haircut, an astrologer could divine your strengths, weaknesses, and when to just stay home with a damp cloth over your head. Your companion flips over another tablet. This one's for the governor's son. Says to delay all contracts until Mercury clears the bull. You blink. Mercury, clears the bowl. He nods solemnly. It's a metaphor. Mostly. But he's still delaying the contracts. Babylon's astrologers used a base 60 numbering system sexagesimal to make their calculations. That system, weirdly enough, is still with us today every time we say 60 minutes in an hour or 360 degrees in a circle. So the next time you glance at a clock, you can thank Babylonian sky watchers who needed tidy ways to track Jupiter's wandering. Historians still argue about how much faith everyday Babylonians had in these charts. Were they deeply believed? Politely tolerated? Secretly mocked behind closed doors? Some tablets suggest people clung to their horoscopes like talismans. Others show clients ignoring them entirely, especially if the advice was inconvenient. Avoid figs for 3 months was never going to land well. There's even debate about whether astrologers ever fudged a prediction to suit their client's ego. Oh yes, Ishtar definitely favors you this month. You should absolutely confront your neighbor about the stolen sheep. That sort of thing. Still, one can't deny the effort. The astrologers recorded lunar eclipses, planetary conjunctions, even the color of the sky at dawn. Some tablets include phrases like "the sky burned with sulfur," which you sincerely hope wasn't a common occurrence. Your friend gestures toward a half-crumbled chart and says, "This one predicted a tax rise." Got it wrong. I told them the stars were cloudy that night. Nobody argued. Ah yes, astrological tax advice. Apparently, entire tax calendars were sometimes aligned with planetary positions. If Saturn was in a bad mood, and Saturn always seemed to be in a bad mood, levies might increase. Or decrease. Or shift from grain to sheep. Depends on which planet was feeling cranky that week. In fact, the whole tax system sometimes resembled a celestial guessing game. Crops failed? Probably a moon issue. Bandits in the north? Clearly Mars was rising too early. You begin to suspect that ancient astrologers were the original masters of the humble shrug. What can I say? The stars have spoken. But astrology wasn't only about taxes and poultry. It was also about timing important rituals, marriages, funerals, harvest feasts, and temple cleansings. If the heavens said wait, you waited. If they said celebrate, you danced like your sandals were on fire. He hands you a soft wax tablet and a stylus. Draw a star, he instructs. Any one. You do your best, which ends up looking like a squashed spider. He nods thoughtfully. That's the spider of mercy. Very rare. You'll have a good week unless you eat goat. You laugh, but he doesn't. Seriously. Don't eat goat. The sun has dipped below the rooftops now, and torches flare to life along the city's main road. Your astrologer friend packs up his charts with great care, wrapping them in a cloth that smells faintly of dates and ink. As he walks away, he turns once more and calls, "Remember, if your dreams feel weird tonight, it's because Mercury's backpedaling again." You nod, utterly unsure what that means, but comforted nonetheless. In a city where stars dictated stew schedules and Venus held sway over your rent payments, belief was a quiet kind of stability. Maybe it didn't matter whether the predictions were right or wrong. Maybe just having a prediction was enough. You glance up. The sky, once again, is filling with stars. And Mercury, wherever it is, probably has something to say. The city hums with a low lullaby now, pots clinking as they're stacked, faint laughter from a nearby courtyard, a sleepy donkey braying like it forgot why. You follow a gentle slope that winds along the edge of the ziggurat and down toward a cluster of smaller temple buildings. Their brickwork is worn smooth, and their entrances are shaded by fraying awnings stitched with zodiac symbols and protective deities. A boy greets you at the doorway, barefoot and blinking away sleep. He says nothing but hands you a strip of cloth dark blue, covered in star-like dots. You tie it around your forehead because, why not? You've entered what's called an incubation chamber. Not for eggs. For dreams. Here in Babylon, dream divining isn't some side hustle for eccentric priests, it's sacred. Temple sleep, also known as temple incubation, is a deeply formalized practice. You lie in a designated sacred space, fall asleep, hopefully, and your dreams are interpreted by priests or astrologers the next day. Easy, right? Except you're supposed to dream about the right things. You're led into a cool room lined with reed mats and lavender-smelling cushions. A fire crackles softly in a clay pot, and above it, faint lines of incense spiral upward, curling like question marks. On one wall is a faded mural of Ishtar holding what looks like a glowing orb in one hand and a goose in the other. Don't ask. This sleep temple, they say, is aligned not only with celestial movement, but also with the temple atop the main ziggurat. When Venus reaches its highest point, both temples are bathed in matching moonlight, a symbolic handshake between earth and sky. You settle in beside a woman who appears to be muttering to a necklace made of sheep bones. She offers you a fig. You accept. That's just the vibe here. Historians still argue whether these temple sleepovers were meant more for healing or for prophecy. Some believe pilgrims came seeking cures for everything from stomach worms to infertility, hoping their dreams would reveal divine advice. Others say it was a state-sanctioned ritual, a cosmic reset button, sort of like spiritual laundry. The temple priest enters, a tall man with a voice like river stones clinking underwater. He doesn't speak. He sings. A low, droning melody with no clear words, just vibrations. It's not unpleasant. It vibrates in your ribs. Then, just as your eyelids begin to droop, he places something at the foot of your mat, a small clay bowl filled with water and floating poppy petals. You're supposed to gaze into it before sleeping. It's said to connect you to the divine realm, or at least give your dreams better production value. You peer into the water. Your reflection wobbles. Behind it, stars twinkle through the open ceiling slats, and you realize this chamber is built to give you a perfect view of the night sky from your mat. That's not coincidence. It's engineering. Every aspect of this room is designed to invite starlight and soothe restlessness. The airflow is angled to mimic a breeze from the Euphrates. The incense blend includes calming herbs used since Sumerian times: blue lotus, myrrh, and something that smells suspiciously like mint and goat milk. The woman next to you is snoring gently now, her necklace of sheep bones clacking each time she exhales. You envy her ease. Your own eyes remain wide, transfixed by the sky above. Then you hear it, a whisper. Not from a person, but from the air itself. It says something like, "You'll forget your sandals in the morning." You're not sure if it's prophecy, or just sleep setting in. The idea, you're told earlier, is that a god might visit your dream. Or a symbol. Or even a phrase. Some dreamers see fish swimming through sand. Others dream of walking backward into the sun. One tablet describes a woman who dreamed of a crow feeding her pomegranate seeds, interpreted as a good omen for marriage. Not all dreams are so poetic, though. One man reportedly dreamed of being chased by angry frogs. He was advised to pay off his debts immediately. Another claimed a lion winked at him, and was told to invest in barley futures. These dream interpretations were kept on temple tablets, building a surreal archive of Babylon's unconscious. Your astrologer friend from earlier probably visited these tablets often, mining them for clues or just for entertainment. Eventually, your breathing slows. The clay bowl remains still beside you, the petals unmoved, the stars above seeming impossibly distant and impossibly close at once. Somewhere, a soft bell rings, more of a chime, really. You sense the night has deepened. In this space, your sense of time collapses. You're no longer tracking lunch by Venus or recording Jupiter's temper tantrums. You're just floating. Dreaming. Or preparing to. One final note drifts through the chamber, and you're not sure if it's a voice, a breeze, or the memory of music. But you hear it. And it makes your bones heavy and warm. And with that weight, you finally truly begin to sleep. You awaken gently, if not entirely voluntarily. A rooster somewhere is attempting a dramatic aria, and a temple bell rings once, twice, no rush, just a reminder. You're still on your mat, the sheep bone necklace lady is gone, and the bowl of poppy water is now bone dry. No memory of a dream remains, unless you count that vague feeling of being handed a scroll by a lizard wearing a crown. The temple priest gives you a sleepy nod and waves you toward the exit. Apparently, divine insights are reviewed after breakfast. As you step outside into the amber dawn, the air already smells of honeyed dates and singed barley. You blink up at the ziggurat, now bathed in a golden haze, and wonder what the stars are planning next. Because in Babylon, the stars are always plotting something. And right now, they might be ruining lunch. You find yourself in a tiny courtyard tucked behind a weaving shop, where several grumbling elders and one very concerned goat are staring at a clay tablet and arguing loudly. Apparently, Saturn is in retrograde, and this is a problem. Now, to be clear, Babylonian astrologers didn't call it retrograde. They called it Amratu, which roughly translates to the sheep walks backward, a term that was both astronomically descriptive and unintentionally hilarious. It described the optical illusion when a planet appears to reverse direction across the night sky. Saturn, the slowest and grumpiest of the visible planets, did this often. The issue? Retrograde Saturn was thought to bring disruptions, spoiled grain, late tax collectors, even domestic squabbles over goat allocation. Today, it's causing panic over whether the temple stew pot should be uncovered before or after the sun passes a particular rooftop. Yes, lunch might be cosmically compromised. One elder insists that Saturn's recent backward shuffle means the lentils will overboil. Another counters that Saturn has no jurisdiction over legumes, and the real problem is Mars being too flirtatious this month. You, wisely, sit down on an overturned basket and stay out of it. Historians still debate just how literally Babylonians interpreted these planetary omens. Was it metaphorical mood tracking? Cosmic psychology? Or did they genuinely believe Saturn had beef with their midday meal? What is clear is that omens were taken seriously. Every celestial oddity had a corresponding entry in a vast archive of omen tablets painstakingly copied by scribes and consulted by priests, kings, and nervous bakers alike. There were tablets specifically devoted to Saturn, listing such predictions as: if Saturn rises late, the barley will sour. If Saturn stands alone, the shepherd will be attacked by dogs. If Saturn crosses the moon, a distant enemy will send messages in bad handwriting. Okay, not that last one, but you get the idea. And the interpretations weren't limited to the stars. The Babylonians also read omens in liver shapes, oil slicks, and even the pattern of crumbs left on a plate. If a goat sneezed twice and then looked east, someone might lose their sandals. In this stew-centered standoff, the goat in question simply sits down and stares blankly at the fire. Perhaps it knows something you don't. Perhaps it just really wants lentils. Eventually, a compromise is reached. The stew is uncovered exactly halfway between Saturn's upward tilt and Jupiter's next noticeable blink. No one's entirely sure what that means, but it sounds impressive, and someone slaps the clay tablet like it owes them money. As the pot is stirred and the argument settles into muttering, you wander off toward the riverbank for some fresh air, hoping to spot a planet that isn't ruining someone's lunch today. The Euphrates glimmers like a snake in a dream. On its banks, a woman draws tiny circles in the dirt with a reed stylus, whispering to herself. A passing fisherman nods at you and says, "She's asking the stars if it's a good day to sell eels." You nod politely. Of course she is. It's easy to laugh, but you also see something kind of sweet about it. In a world of unpredictable harvests, capricious kings, and crocodiles that occasionally wander into your bathhouse, it must have been comforting to believe the stars had reasons, even if those reasons involved Saturn getting emotional over barley. And, well, Saturn did have a vibe. In Babylonian records, Saturn was associated with the god Ninurta, patron of war, agriculture, and the general concept of being grumpy but competent. If Jupiter was the flashy golden boy of the sky, Saturn was the tired uncle who shows up late to family gatherings and insists on rearranging the furniture. So yes, it makes a weird kind of sense that his retrogrades were taken seriously. And blamed. Often. Remember the astrologer from earlier? He once wrote on a tablet, "The planet that delays is the one that governs delay." Scholars still argue whether he meant it as cosmic philosophy or an excuse for not showing up to a meeting. Either way, you can't help but smile. The stew eventually turns out fine. The goat is mildly disappointed. The stars, as always, go on rotating above you, aloof, mysterious, and somehow deeply invested in your lunch schedule. You lean back against a sun-warmed brick and watch Saturn fade into the daytime sky, invisible to the eye but definitely present in the gossip. The sheep might be walking backward, but here in Babylon, people still move forward spoon in hand, head full of omens, stomach growling politely. Evening returns to Babylon like a slow breath, warm and dusty and fragrant with cook fires. The streets, once bustling with clay-juggling merchants and children yelling about fish, now begin to quiet. Not completely, this city doesn't sleep easily, but there's a noticeable softening to the sounds, muted footsteps over brick, a lute in the distance plucking something melancholy, a sheep coughing like it forgot how. You find yourself drifting again, this time along the Euphrates edge. The water reflects twilight in slow ripples, smearing pinks and oranges across the river like a lazy painter unsure about color theory. Reeds sway gently at the bank. A turtle blinks at you, unimpressed. Behind you, the silhouette of the great ziggurat dominates the skyline, its terraces stacked like forgotten lunch trays, each layer home to birds, beetles, wind, and wonder. From its topmost level where the temple to the sky god Marduk sits, it's said you can see all the stars Babylon ever cared about. Though, after the day you've had, you suspect some of those stars are watching you back. The sun kisses the horizon now, and the city lights 100 tiny fires in reply, lanterns in doorways, torches flickering along rooftops, glowing coals nestled into street ovens still baking late-night flatbreads. And, somewhere out there, someone is adjusting their dinner plans because Venus blinked unexpectedly. You wander through a quieter district, now homes of scribes and priests and older couples who long ago gave up debating when Saturn is allowed to speak. Clay tablets rest in baskets outside windows, cooling in the air like cookies. One window bears a painted symbol of the moon cradled in an ox's horns. This family, clearly, prefers lunar omens. You can respect that. A gentle breeze wafts over you, bringing scents of cinnamon and toasted grain. Somewhere, someone is laughing softly, too far to hear the joke, but close enough to feel the warmth of it. The sky overhead has deepened to a velvet indigo, and now, slowly, the stars reappear. You recognize a few. The 7 dots representing the Pleiades. The great bull's eye Aldebaran, fiery red and staring. And of course, the steady crawl of Jupiter, probably deciding who should have dessert tonight. You pass a man perched on a bench, cradling a lyre. He strums lazily, no song in particular, just idle notes wandering like thoughts. You nod. He nods. Nothing needs to be said. Babylon at night has its own kind of language, and you're learning it syllable by sleepy syllable. Historians still argue whether Babylonians truly believed their stars were divine messengers or just celestial bureaucrats keeping cosmic time. But down here, with dust on your sandals and your head full of dreams, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the stars were part of the city's rhythm, its celestial heartbeat. You cross a narrow alley where a cat leaps from one rooftop to another with a look of deep philosophical disdain. The alley opens into a small courtyard, where an elderly woman fans smoke over a bowl of lentils and murmurs something in Old Akkadian. A protective charm for her grandchild's exam tomorrow? A prayer for better figs? Or just an old habit? Hard to say. She offers you a fig. You accept. And so the day ends as it began, with starlight, spice, and gentle uncertainty. Somewhere, a scribe is noting the position of Mars in the ledger, muttering about how it will affect tomorrow's goat prices. A baker is closing his shutters with a grunt. A priest is climbing the ziggurat, tablet in hand, preparing to watch the sky and whisper new predictions. And a sleepy donkey tries very hard to sing along with a night bird. You find a quiet spot on a warm wall, sit down, and tilt your head up. The stars are clearer now. Brighter. Familiar, even. Tomorrow, people will again argue over the lunch schedule, based on Saturn's mood. Children will point at Venus and ask if she's going to blink twice. The lentils might burn. Or they might not. But tonight? Tonight is peaceful. You feel the slow rhythm of the universe humming through the stones beneath you, steady and old. The same rhythm that once guided irrigation canals and told scribes when to rest and helped decide when to eat stew. The same rhythm you've been following all day. You close your eyes. The wind rustles the reeds. The Euphrates sighs. And the stars continue their ancient, sleepy march. So now, as the final embers of our Babylonian day flicker out, you find yourself wrapped in that warm, dusky silence, the kind only a desert city can offer when the heat has faded and the stars are humming. Let the world soften around the edges. Imagine that the bricks beneath you hold the memory of centuries of bare feet padding past, of soft laughter echoing between walls, of stargazers whispering secrets only the sky could hear. The air is still warm, but calm, as if the wind itself has paused to listen. In the distance, a single note from a reed flute drifts through the night, fading almost as soon as it arrives. The kind of sound that doesn't demand attention, it just keeps you company while your thoughts begin to slow. Your breath deepens, matching the pace of the Euphrates. Your shoulders soften. That slight crease in your brow, yes, even that begins to smooth. Whatever worries you brought with you tonight, let them slip downstream with the starlight, wrapped in papyrus and tied with a reed. Tomorrow will come with its own rhythm. But for now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, adrift in ancient time, belly full of figs, mind full of stars, and body perfectly at rest. Sleep now. The sky will keep watch. End of script. Sweet dreams.